This is the second studio hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderonay. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, hosts of the show. And today, our guests are Stephen and Jason Summers of Crest Real Estate. Crest Real Estate is an expediter in Los Angeles, specializing in housing. And with Jason and Stephen, we discussed rebuilding Los Angeles in the wake of the recent wildfires. And as experts and expediters, they offer their advice and thoughts on some specific aspects of rebuilding and permitting, and also some general guidance and thoughts on what it means to undertake a home construction project. I hope you guys find this helpful. And as a reminder, our office, which is Fame Architecture and Design, is offering complimentary project starter services for anyone rebuilding as a result of the fires. So if you need any help or advice, feel free to reach out to us or Crest Real Estate. Both of our informations will be in the episode notes. Sponsors.
Would you like to get as-built faster?
Yes.
Okay. IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD 300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan-to-BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Once a building scan is complete, IPX delivers detailed BIM, CAD, 360 virtual tours, and material takeoffs in their platform, where you can view, share, export, query, and quantify areas, floors, and materials. Check out the IPX link in our show notes. Managing design projects and specifications can be challenging, but Programma makes it effortless. Trusted by top interior design firms in over 75 countries, it's the world's most elegant software for interior designers. With its suite of powerful tools, you will experience smoother client interactions with less back and forth, saving you hours of admin work and making your job more enjoyable. Stop struggling and start thriving with the seriously powerful Programma. Click the link in our show notes and get 25% off an annual subscription with code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout. You will wonder how you ever worked without it.
This is the second studio with myself, Marina, and our guests, Jason and Stephen. Here we go. Well, let's kick it off by just hearing from, I'm curious how things are going for you guys, because you're kind of at the epicenter, I feel like, of all things regarding development and building in Los Angeles. And with the fires, are you guys completely inundated with calls and everyone asking for information?
I mean, it's definitely been some of the busiest months of our careers, no doubt about it. We have done a lot of work in these communities historically, the communities that were affected by the fires, especially the Palisades in Malibu. Yeah. And, through our work, we just know a large number of homeowners, HOAs, and other community members. And so, we have been called in to help out, help disseminate information, and just really try to guide people. And what we've been trying to do is get accurate information out there. Yeah. Because we're at the beginning of what's going to be a multi-year process, where this is something that is unprecedented. I mean, there have been smaller events. There's been Woolsey. There have been similarly scaled events elsewhere, but not here in Los Angeles. And right now, what's been really critical is just getting that information out to people that is accurate so that people know how to move forward. But on our end, it's definitely, it's been a huge amount of work. On some days, maybe you could say overwhelming, but in other ways, it's actually, it's been energizing. We both love what we do, but the work has never been more important than it is today.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point, and I think that, we were talking before, we hit record, that building a house already is a difficult task. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. It takes a lot of commitment, like you were saying. And now for the folks who are fortunate enough to rebuild as a result of the fires, you have layered on top of that the stress, the emotional stress from losing a house, all the fire-specific things they have to navigate right now, and the lack of information. So does it seem like now, because it's been, a month and a half or whatever since the fires, that there is a lot more clarity about the different paths forward people can take from a permitting and approvals perspective? Because there is the qualifying rebuild for up to 110% of what was there before, could do new construction, but there's confusion as to what all those terms mean.
Of course. I think that, the whole process for many of these people, they never anticipated that they'd be going through a rebuild process. Yeah. So one of the things we've taken a lot of pride in, because we are at the tip of the spear on getting these projects through the city typically, and working with the architects, the engineers, the contractors, and helping them as their conduit to understand what they can and cannot do with a project. Well, now it's even more critical because now we're talking to homeowners that really don't know anything about the development process, but have been recommended to our firm through friends, family, architects, any number of people, real estate agents that are in the community that have worked with us successfully in the past. So it's a real education for many of these people, which is another reason we're here today. And thank you so much for having us, because getting out the accurate information about how to rebuild these houses is so critical. And I've had some frustrations over the last couple of weeks about a lot of misinformation that is out there about what certain limitations are, what certain allowances could be, from clearing your lot with Army Corps of Engineers to the limitations of what you can do to rebuild your house. So we're going to get into all of that today and hopefully can spread that accurate information, because there's, so many ways to interpret certain codes. Also, you hear different even city officials saying different things, but there is a certain point of contact and a set of rules that does set these guidelines. And so, it's important to include somebody that really understands in the process. And we are, doing it for as many projects as possible. We get a huge amount of calls every single day. Our offices, it is a pretty significant amount of work that we're going through. And fortunately, Stephen and I have a unusual bandwidth to take on not just our existing projects and make sure that they're all being taken care of efficiently and effectively, but, hundreds of projects that are headed our way.
Yeah, and more.
Maybe
more
it's
coming.
important to talk about for those that don't know, and we have been on the podcast before, which is exciting. I think, we were the first 2-time now.
You're the first third.
three
third.
times.
Yeah, actually, that's true.
So we got to stay ahead of the curve always. But unfortunate circumstances on this one. It hits close to home. Our uncle lost his home, which was kind of the primary Summers family home for gatherings, weddings. It was a beautiful ranch style house up at Will Rogers, and walking through the rubble, which I've done, was jarring and emotional. We were very fortunate that he found a safe that burned in the fire that had some old photos of our grandparents and family members. So some heirlooms that were there, but a lot of things in the house. It's unfathomable to think about what people lost, because especially on this wide of a scale, so many thought that nothing was actually, there's no way my house could burn. If my house burned, that would mean hundreds of other houses around my house burned, and they would never let that happen.
Right.
And another thing we should definitely talk about today is, it is important to look back and understand why some of these things happened, and go forward and realize, what could have been avoided, because what happened there could happen in many other hillside communities that did not burn. And so we need to prepare those communities just as much as we need to rebuild back Palisades and Altadena with these fire resistant houses.
I actually think the focus on that has been missed thus
Yeah.
far, because look, the emotional toll is on these people who have lost their houses, but we do have to be preparing long term for all of these communities to be resilient, not just the ones that are being built back.
And on that note, I'm trying to think of the release schedule for us, but we have a few different recordings coming out for the listeners that are focused on that, on retrofitting roofs in actually a very cost-effective way for older houses, which is a new thing in the code. And then we just recently interviewed Frontline Wildfire Defense sprinkler systems. They're super interesting.
Yes.
So folks should check that out. But starting with...
maybe let's put together some sort of a agenda so people can understand what we're about to go through. And I think it'll all start with, what the process looks like to get launched on going through your rebuild, assembling the team, understanding what you can and cannot do on your property. And then, what the process is going to look like. Following that, we can jump into some of the fire resistant items and talk about a really exciting project that, taking this tragedy and creating something good and beneficial out of it with what we're calling the Case Study 2.0 program, which is a really, architecturally significant idea that has a lot of buy-in and a lot of people excited to contribute. So with that, if you have any other questions, but I'll let Stephen kind of launch into part of the rebuild process, or I'll talk about assembling the team. And then you talk about the next process. Sure. So if you've lost your home, it's a daunting situation. But the first thing when you do get ready and decide that you want to rebuild in this area, which we've been very encouraged with how many people have really felt this deep, deep connection to these areas that they lost their homes. And want to build back their communities. They feel a responsibility along with many of their other neighbors, because in order to build back these places and have them be habitable, it's going to take a majority of the houses getting rebuilt and rebuilt quickly. So people feel a community effort and a responsibility to build back. So your first thing is figuring out who you're going to work with as an architect. Your architect is going to be your primary, hand holder and problem solver throughout this entire process. It's about you figuring out what design style you want. So if you want traditional, which there are so many in Palisades that are, that very beautiful family-oriented style house, ask around, ask who's had these types of houses. You could certainly come to us and get recommendations. If you're looking to maybe change to a contemporary house, right? You want to find your modern architect. You want to find an architect that understands you, that you feel cares about you and your family's future, and is someone that you could see being friends with, right, through this process and for a long time, because the architect really is that deeper bond connection to understand your lifestyle and how to build back on your property.
I mean, the relationship that you have with an architect throughout building your personal house is massive. And I don't think people realize, if you haven't done it before, just how much time you spend coordinating with that architect. I'm finishing a family house for my family right now, and we've been working with an architect now for 3 years, basically, from the initial meetings, figuring out styles, putting pen to paper, and then all the way. It's not just once a set of plans is created. The architect is also so heavily involved during construction, working out all of these little details. And so you're completely right. If you need to find someone that you don't only just like their style, but you also like them personally, and you feel like you can get along through a process that hopefully will be fun for the most part, but can be trying at times, for sure.
The fortunate thing here is, I think that being in Los Angeles, you have access to the largest number of highly talented, wonderful human beings in the architecture field. I can't imagine there's another city that has a wider base of talent and a wider base of people that are just really good human beings.
Especially for single family home construction.
Especially there, right? A lot of talent in all the different styles that you could ever imagine. That being said, we also have architects from around the world that are already working in these Palisades projects for the new fire rebuilds. So you have international opportunity to choose from, but of course, right here locally, people are really motivated to help. And so from that point forward, I think that probably the next step is a land use consultant, much like, a lot of times it is Crest that comes in and is part of that process, and identifying what the due diligence of what you can and cannot do with that property is. So we're going to come in and analyze your site, and Palisades or Altadena have very wide ranging types of projects, Malibu as well, where there's just so many nuances and intricacies to what can and cannot be done, because a lot of these older houses also have things that maybe are not currently allowed on properties today. So we have to analyze the cost benefit of maintaining old allowances with maximizing new square footage
Mm-hmm.
for your house. Because as you're designing and figuring out what to do, you also now have to start thinking about the cost of the project, right? So there is an economy of scale, even though construction, as everybody knows, has gone up a huge percentage over the last 5 to 10 years, but especially in the last 5 years, has skyrocketed. So your foundation, the infrastructure, those costs are so significant that if you're only building a small amount of square footage, you're going to be having a very high price per square foot. So sometimes it may make more economic sense because of a future valuation standpoint to also maybe maximize the allowable square footage on these houses.
Yep.
So, you want to have a team in there that really understands the cost and the future value to create, something that makes sense financially, because building a house is also an investment, right? Even if you plan to live there for a very long time, you want to do the right thing for yourself, your family, and your future.
I do think that there is a fine line between always maxing out, though, and building to what is most suited for your family, especially if you're planning on living in this house for 10 years or longer, right? There's absolutely value in maxing out the square footage, and it's critical to know what these parameters are for how much you can build. But some people are going to decide, you know what, maybe I'm a little bit older, I want a single family home. And if I truly max out the square footage on a single family home on a 6,500 square foot lot, I won't have any yard space.
Right.
And so I think understanding not just what the parameters are, but also what is it that you want out of this house, and how long do you want to be there for? Of course, nobody can fully predict what will happen in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, et cetera. But just thinking through the future of this house that you're building is important to guide you in terms of what the end product can be. And to your point about due diligence being a critical component up front, something that Jason and I are really big advocates of is planning aggressively before the start of each phase of a construction project.
Yes. Yes.
It's unbelievable how often clients will kind of rush ahead and then end up losing time because something was missed because there wasn't proper planning up front. So the part that we're most heavily involved in is planning from a zoning, parameters, and allowances perspective, and that's the due diligence up front. So before your architect is putting pen to paper and designing the house, figuring out what is the maximum height, the setback requirements, the floor area allowances. Doing all of that enables you to hopefully design once, right? And get it right from the outset, at least on the big picture massing of the house. It's really critical up front, because if you then get into the plan check process and things were missed, there are design changes that cost money to have your consultants deal with. And this same principle applies before you start construction, right? We always tell our clients, I'd rather have you start construction, not because of permits, we want to get the permits as quickly as possible, but we'd rather have you take a pause of an extra month or 2 months before you start construction to just dot your I's, cross your T's, make sure the contractor has double and triple checked everything, so that once you're actually in that next phase, construction in this case, you can fly. And you're not, waiting or moving backwards, even worse.
We should have you
Our
guys on the show
mantra-
more often. This is the stuff we say all the time, but I think our
But we're
listeners are
architects,
tired of
so-
hearing us say it.
Sure.
Well, I think that's actually been the real benefit, and we talked about that last time, of doing developments and getting involved more in construction has made us better permit expediters, because now we are setting clients up not just for a fast start point, but a successful finish.
Right.
And so now we're really preaching the saying of patience and discipline, right? Patience to start while you get everything completed, and then discipline to not make changes and let the builder build, right? Let the builder build is the builder's favorite things. Also, from a cost perspective, the only time you have any negotiating power on a project when you're in construction is during the subcontractor bidding phase. Once the subcontractors are selected and you make a change in the field, you're done, because you don't have any negotiating power, and they will then,
because you need
get
them to
back
move
that
fast.
money.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, with that, it is, of course, super important to create a space that feels fresh and open. And I think that we have seen a lot of people not maximize projects because of wanting to have more yard space.
Mm.
But, it is important to note that you aren't limited only to the 110%, which we'll get into as well,
Yeah.
which is a really key component. So once we have the plans designed and developed, Stephen's going to go through the current City of LA process. We have Altadena is in the county. Malibu's its own city. We still do not even know what the rules of engagement are for the beachfront properties that burn down. Because at the state level, you have an exemption from coastal if you stay within the 110%.
Mm-hmm.
However, from the engineering standpoint, with the wave uprush studies and things like that, we don't know if you'll actually be able to build the houses back in their location. So what we're going to focus on today is predominantly the City of LA and their process, which has been well defined. There have been many things that have not been done well in the city recently, but I think they have put together a very, very clear set of rules of where you go, and what the process is going to look like for your rebuild. So
Yeah, so it's all really interesting. Piggybacking off of what you were saying with deciding, well, first of all, knowing what you can and cannot build, and deciding, let's say, roughly how much to build, and that calculation of the cost of what makes sense for you as a family or as a couple or whoever it is, and then the long-term financial investment of the property. And this is exactly what we were talking about with a couple clients recently, one of which is in the Palisades about that. And a lot of the focus for these folks has been trying to stay within the qualifying rebuild category of building only up to an additional 10%, but not going past that, right? Because it's been kind of preached and sort of marketed as the fastest way to get things done. Do this, it'll be fast and easier, and go that route. And for a lot of folks who are thinking, well, maybe I don't need a house that's bigger than what was there before, significantly. And our point, and you guys can touch on this for sure, was, well, there is a lot of things to consider that are specific to this situation of fire rebuilds. But there's also just thinking long-term about the project full stop, right? So if this is a house you plan on keeping for the next 20 or 30 years, let's also not lose sight of that big picture, because you don't want to build something that ends up being too small or even too big, and you rush through that decision because of these fire-specific criteria that we're dealing with. You want to think about the 30-year span, what house you want to be in for the next 30 years. Does it make sense to build 2,000 square feet in the Palisades when you could be building bigger for your future family and whatever else? And I think being able to, it goes back to also being paired with an architect who's going to be your advocate and your friend, your ally, and the person that's thinking through all of these many factors with you becomes critical. But zooming in, so on the subject of qualifying rebuilds where we can use that extra 10%, again, one of the things that's been said is that this will be the fastest and most efficient way to do it. I've heard that's not exactly always the case, or not by as much as it claims to be. What are your guys' opinions about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I want to just reiterate that we're talking about the city of Los Angeles, which is primarily the Pacific Palisades area with respect to these fires. There are slightly different regulations for the county and the city of Malibu. But in the city of Los Angeles, the most important thing to note up front is in the mayor's original executive order regarding the rebuilding process, she made it very clear that all fire rebuilds, regardless of whether you are under 110% or over 110%, will go through an expedited plan check review process. So regardless of the 110% threshold, if you are a fire rebuild project, you will get an expedited plan check review with the city of Los Angeles. And that is something that people, I think, do not realize, because this 110%, as you're mentioning, it's kind of been marketed out there as
it's
this really key threshold. But there are some instances where exceeding the 110% threshold will have a more significant timeline impact, but it's rare. It's about 5% of properties in the Palisades, I would say, where you are in the coastal zone and typically on a bluff. So about half of the Palisades is not in the coastal zone at all. So those projects don't have to worry about any coastal development permits. The other half of the Palisades, a majority of it that is in the coastal zone is in an overlay called a categorical exclusion zone, for those properties, even when you exceed 110%, you can get a categorical exclusion, which is like a waiver,
Mm-hmm.
from going through a full coastal development permit process. And ultimately what that means is that categorical exclusion happens concurrently with your plan check process. It takes about 2 months to complete. So it will just run in parallel
Yeah, it's not
with
long.
it's not long at
Yeah.
all. It's not discretionary. There's no public hearing.
Mm.
And so between the non-coastal zone properties in the Palisades and the categorical exclusion zone properties, that's 90 to 95%
Gotcha.
of the Palisades.
Gotcha.
For those lots, the only impacts of exceeding the 110% threshold are that you may lose any existing non-conforming rights. So if your house had existing non-conforming, front, side, or rear yard setbacks, if you're under 110%, you can maintain those. If you exceed 110%, you have to bring those into compliance. But
Yeah.
complying with your setbacks is not a big deal.
No. And if you're talking about going past, so the other thing too is that I think a lot of homeowners, they tend to focus on the metrics, which is sort of understandable. And they think about like, okay, that extra 10% will only get me, will get me another X number of square feet. What is that worth? And one of the things we've been telling folks is like, it's not necessarily just about the raw square footage, right? It's about the quality of the house. And if at the 110% or the extra 10% also means you're limiting yourself to the current massing roughly, right? Whereas if you do a new house and you ignore those rule sets, you can do something that's very different that might be much more well designed to fit your needs and has less to do with the additional raw square footage we're adding and more to do with like the shape of the house that might be, again, better fitted for what you're actually needing to do for yourself.
Right. And so the other potential impacts of exceeding the 110% threshold is that the city is working on waiving certain regulations if you stay under 110%. They haven't identified what those regulations will be, but it's supposed to be regulations that are not critical to health and safety. So as an example, we could see them waiving stormwater capture and reuse requirements, which, are somewhat costly to implement and are not, strictly speaking, necessary in any way. Frankly, a lot of those systems go unused after they're built anyway. They may waive solar panel requirements, but most of our clients end up wanting to put in solar panels anyway. And so there may be other regulations like that do get waived and could slightly reduce the cost if you stay under 110%. And so what I've been saying to clients is, if you look at the maximum square footage you could build on the site, and ultimately what you want to build on the site, if that ended up being 115%, then maybe it would make sense to just stick to 110% because your incremental value of that extra 5% is perhaps not so significant. It could be outweighed by the benefits of staying under 110%. But if you're in a situation where what you want to build and what you can build is 150%, 200%, et cetera, that incremental value, both in end value of the property and value to you as a homeowner, is going to outweigh the benefits of staying under that 110% threshold. And unless you're in one of those problematic coastal zones, you're going to have basically just as fast of a process.
Yeah.
One of the questions that, a lot of the architects community was wondering is that the expedited plan check process, is it just for kind of like the first round of review and then the process is going to take as long as, a typical application, or is it really from A to Z until the permit gets issued?
It's from A to Z, and they have a dedicated staff that's working on these fire rebuild projects. So you will get really detailed treatment, it looks like, and we're already seeing it because we're in plan check with some of these fire rebuilds. And so it will be, all the way through. However, you're still having to go through a plethora of different departments for clearances, right? This whole notion of kind of the rubber stamp standardized plan permits where there's this preparation from licensed architects,
certification,
self-certification. One, even doing thousands and thousands of projects, no matter how small, even though we review before we submit to plan check, it's so rare to not find some levels of corrections. One. Two, you still have all these different departments that you have to go through for clearances, right? fire department, Bureau of Engineering, public work, all of these different departments that we have to go through are still going to be there, and you're still going to have to get those clearances. So it's still quite a process, but there is desire from the people reviewing it at the city to put a major emphasis on fast tracking these projects.
We're expecting, as opposed to a typical plan check process for a new single family dwelling, which pre-fire was taking about 6 to 8 months if you didn't have any discretionary entitlements or variances. We're anticipating that these fire rebuilds will be permitted in roughly 3 to 4 months. So about half the time.
We will be
significant.
going vertical on construction for newly permitted projects this summer. So
Wow.
at the beginning, when the fire happened, people did not have those lofty of expectations, but we are certain that we will be going vertical this summer and hopefully very early summer.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fast. That's like really soon. That's
It's really soon, but
Really
it's
soon.
needed, and the more the better. And what we do recommend, because currently the city is able to manage all the projects they have, but at some point there's going to be an awful lot of projects, hundreds, if not 1,000, that are in the city at any particular time. Probably hundreds.
Yeah.
And once it gets to that threshold point, is it going to start taking longer for these plan checkers to get through it? Are they going to up their staff? We don't know. We hope that they'll be able to manage, but we do encourage people to go through the permit process as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I think that it's still really critical to, even if you don't want to start your construction right away, that you get your construction ready to start as soon as possible. And you make that threshold, that break point of signing up the architect, getting into plan check, because at that point, once you have permits, you have options.
Yeah.
And up until that point, it's still just very much up in the air.
I think also like the sooner you get in, the less maybe requirements there might be, right? Like, I mean, after the city starts reviewing hundreds and hundreds of applications and start thinking a bit more through like what would be required, there might be more things that we have to comply with. So
that's a good hypothesis. I think that happened with the Santa Rosa fire, where the initial wave of folks who submitted their plans, it happened efficiently because they were, I don't know if they were expedited, but it happened efficiently. But then the local jurisdictions, uncovered, after, to your point, more and more people were applying. They're like, well, actually, let's check out this thing also, for the next round of plans that are being submitted. And then as a result of that and more people applying, it just took longer. So yeah, it makes sense. Get in, if you can get in sooner, then do it.
Just to put a bow on the plan check process, exceeding the 110%, we hope that knowledge gets out there for people so that they understand they have much more optionality on their property. Whether what they choose to do on it, that's up to them and what makes sense for their property. But it's important that people that have lost so much understand what all of their rights are, right? So that's what's really critical, is at least know what your rights are. And your rights basically are to build to the full extent of the code, which is, fairly reasonable and in some cases generous. Unless you were on a coastal bluff, that could take, it's just a time issue at that point, right? Because coastal takes a lot of time.
And now a little break for our show sponsors.
Revit users, you have access to a powerful new capability you might not know about. Available with Revit version 2023.1 onward, Autodesk Insight is a next-generation carbon analysis tool that can help you make the leap toward low-carbon design. With only a few clicks, Insight lets you analyze, understand, and track the embodied and operational carbon impact of your design choices. You can then visualize opportunities for energy efficiency and carbon mitigation with its flexible dashboards, helping you make more sustainable and informed decisions. Check out the Insight link in our show notes to learn more. This episode of The Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster, so you can focus on design, not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter and more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes.
So getting through that, now we're talking about some information about the demo and site clearing process with
Yeah.
Army Corps,
Yeah.
which is ever evolving. And by the time whoever listens to this podcast, there's probably going to be a different story. But
We're going to
you
try
know,
to expedite this, but yeah.
the issue with the clearing is someone will be first and someone will be last. And you don't know when yours is going to come to the table. So it's coming up in about a week or two, having to opt in or opt out
Mhm.
of the Army Corps clearing. We are recommending that anybody opt in, right? Even if you think, oh, they're never going to get to opt in, because you can always opt out.
Yeah.
But you cannot opt in once you have opted out.
The
Right.
deadline being the end of March.
The end of March
right?
is
Yeah.
the deadline to opt in. So we do recommend that people opt into the program, because while you're doing your plan check process, they may get to you. And if they get to you, that's going to save you money on your demo. And if they don't get to you and you're ready to start your project, it's not an overwhelming cost to do it yourself with a certified demo contractor. You then opt out, you get the demo contractor in, you clear the site. So I think that keeping the optionality open is what we've been preaching, and something that hopefully people are utilizing.
And the Army Corps is moving fast
Mm.
right now. It's not necessarily going to always be a perfect process when we're talking about operating at the scale that this process needs to be operated at, but they are clearing several lots. They have, I want to say, 30 to 40 active crews in the Palisades alone right now. And I'm on a WhatsApp thread with like 550 homeowners in the Alphabet Streets in the Palisades. And every single day, there are new homeowners chiming in on the thread saying, I just got my call 72 hours before demo is going to get started. The Army Corps is going to be out at my site. So they are moving through the community. And that's not to say that going private isn't a perfectly acceptable option as well, but it's important for people to realize that the Army Corps is getting a move on.
Again, know your options, know what value you can create and maintain on your property.
Are there any downsides to using the Army Corps of Engineers? Some of the things we've heard was that, A, I think they still end up billing the insurance, and then B, if you have a property and you're trying to be sensitive in retaining some things, that's much more difficult to control with ACE compared to going private. Like if you're fully demoing the site, then ACE can come in and do what they're going to do. But if you're trying to be picky about what you're keeping, maybe less a good route.
It's a great point. So first of all, with respect to insurance proceeds, the way that the Army Corps program is set up, if your insurance policy had a specific provision for funds for debris removal after a disaster, then the Army Corps will be requesting those funds roughly a year after the cleanup is done. So what will happen is they go in, they do the cleanup. They don't wait to get the money ahead of time. And then they will essentially send a bill to you and your insurer for the insurer to give the Army Corps that money that was specifically kind of split off in your insurance policy for debris removal. If that money had to be utilized because perhaps the Army Corps didn't do a good job and there were other things that needed to be cleared after they were done, it's actually written on one of the county websites that they will just go after what is remaining with the insurance company.
Oh, okay.
But it's not like they're going to come to you personally.
Right.
That's, at least what is written on county websites currently.
Right.
Obviously, this is a first for a lot of us. So I can't speak to exactly how that process is going to be handled, but it seems like they're going to take the money when the money's there from the insurance companies, but not go after individuals in a problematic way.
That makes sense.
Which that was a big concern of people's for a while.
Having the Army Corps
Again, a lot of
engineers show up.
information that's out there that isn't fully understood.
Yeah.
And then in terms of more selective demolition, so there are at times reasons to want to maintain a portion of the foundation from the pre-existing structure. I will note that we've learned through the Woolsey fire, maintaining these foundations, they're pretty worthless. One benefit potentially is if you can maintain a little bit of foundation to call a project a remodel addition.
I want to talk about that. Yeah.
Well, the benefit you would get there is you may be able to maintain a gas line.
Exactly.
Because LA has gone to this all electric, which, my understanding is we don't even have the capacity for at this point.
It's a separate podcast.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. But, if you do maintain some of the foundation and call it a remodel, even though you'll be reassessed, that's another misconception that there's this way better.
Just to be clear, if you're going over 110%.
Yeah.
If you're under 110%, you get to maintain your gas connection regardless,
Correct.
and your property's not supposed to be reassessed.
Right.
But if you are going over, maintaining the component of foundation will allow it to be called a remodel addition, and then you will be able to keep that gas line.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. One of the other things I wanted to touch on, which I know has been talked about.
But actually, real quick, Stephen, will you finish that on?
So with the Army Corps.
Army Corps.
Oh, yeah, right.
From what I've heard, they call you 72 hours before, and you do have the opportunity. First of all, on the opt-in form, you can note whether or not you want the Army Corps to remove foundation. So you could simply say, no, don't remove the foundation, leave it intact. Alternatively, I have heard that the Army Corps contractors in the field, you can basically meet with them while they're clearing your lot, and you can try to give them specific parameters. I get a little bit, skeptical about relying on that, not because the Army Corps contractors are, bad people in any way or, not paying attention, but they just have a huge amount of properties to go through.
Yeah.
And so I have to imagine it's difficult for them to be so detailed on every single lot. I think if you really want to keep your foundation, you probably just check that box that says, don't touch my foundation.
Yeah. And it's worth noting this, as far as we can tell, and you guys have echoed the same sentiment, that these foundations that were built 30 plus years ago, you're just not going to reuse them. If you're building a brand new house on top of it, it's a no-go. Even if they're sound, they were tested to be sound from when they were first built. Things have evolved greatly just in the last 10 years even, that it just doesn't make sense, to use them.
Yeah, and the foundation of the rebuild projects need to be built up to current code.
Yeah.
So that's, like you're saying, these older foundations are pretty worthless. And then also in the intense heat of these fires, it can affect the composition of the concrete. It melts, piping and plumbing that's within the concrete. So
it turns to powder, actually. People don't know that.
Yeah.
You can just... the thing I was going to ask is the term like for like, not to get too backward in the conversation, but I know that it's a phrase that's been kind of thrown about. And I think people think that what it means is I need to build what it sounds like, which is like for like. I need to put back exactly what it was before. It needs to look exactly like it was before. But, let us know, is that the case or not the case?
It's not the case. Look, if you had a set of plans for a house that was built not that long ago and you want to rebuild the same thing, certainly that's going to be the fastest process if you have a set of plans that was already approved by the city. And you can feel free to reuse that set of plans and build like for like, right. But generally speaking, if you're staying under the 110% threshold, it's more of a massing question of staying within the bulk, the volume, the height, and the location of the building. But you can change the style, you can change the floor plans, the finishes, all of that completely. It can look like a completely different house. And if you're going above the 110%, which, as we've talked about, is not such a big deal, you really don't have to worry about like for like at all.
Yeah. It becomes a normal project in terms of what you can do, but now you're expedited, to your point earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's also, I wanted to make sure folks understand what you just said too, that the 110% is not just about raw square footage. It's about the massing, so the height and basically kind of where it is. Massing is the architectural term, but volume, like with the shape of the house and where
Including
it is roughly.
basement.
Including basement. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a good point.
Yeah, which,
That's a good
I mean,
point.
that's an unfortunate interpretation. I personally disagree. They are considering, if you added a basement, which is exempted square footage, doesn't count against your FAR, but if you added a basement, you would then be exceeding your 110% threshold.
Yeah.
This is underground. How's that?
I know.
But that is the ruling that's come down.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. It's also good.
Including for coast. That would have been a really good one to maintain on coastal. Let's say because you do want to avoid the lengthy coastal process, which is the coastal bluff properties. And, doing a basement would have definitely helped there, but so it is.
You can at least do an ADU. You can add an ADU on
that's
those
a great
properties.
point.
So if you're staying under 110% on those select coastal properties where you would need a full coastal development permit if you exceeded 110, if you stay under 110%, you can also add an accessory dwelling unit and still be exempt from the full coastal development permit process, which that can get you an extra 800 to 1,200 square feet.
Yeah.
It's meaningful.
Yeah.
It's real square
That's
footage.
also in
Yeah.
all of the palaces. So actually, that is where, if you're staying under the 110, but you also could do an ADU and that satisfies your needs, and the ADU can be attached to
Yeah.
the main building, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a detached accessory building.
And one thing we
Um,
don't have clarity on yet from the city, and they're working on a major implementation memo for all of these regulations, is how they will look at attached ADUs with respect to the 110% threshold at the city level. At the state level, they have said you're exempt from coastal in that
Mhm.
situation.
Mhm.
But at the city level, we're still waiting to hear from them just how that will get factored in. But a detached ADU would absolutely not be part of your 110.
We also heard that apparently you might be able to build a detached ADU before the main house gets built, which would allow people to, for
get
example, in
back.
Altadena, to get back living on their property while their main house is being built, so they don't have to be relocated somewhere else until everything is back into place,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
would be pretty advantageous, I think.
Yeah. I mean, look, we need all creative solutions to be able to get people back living on these properties.
Yeah.
And to that note, I think that it is so critical to have anybody that can build, right? We need to be encouraging not just of people that lived in the community and end users to build back. We're going to need developers, right? We're going to need developers to build out in scale, in mass, to get enough properties back so that when you want to move into your house, you're not living on a block that's also still
Yeah.
completely undeveloped, and you're not to be living around construction forever. So the encouragement of development, whatever it may be, as long as, of course, the quality level is
Right.
there,
Yeah.
right? Which is what we are really trying to encourage. But I think that, this has happened at a time when developers, especially in the high net worth LA region, have realized that building something kind of very bland, there's not a big market for it. So the developers in LA have gotten a lot more savvy in terms of quality on their production, design style, in order to make sure they're meeting the market demands. So I'm cautiously optimistic that the developers that are coming in and who we've spoken to, who are very experienced developers, and even the big corporations like Thomas James Homes, who builds a really nice house and can do it at scale and comes through a community and can really help out here, because we need also the prefab houses. Rick Caruso has his Steadfast program that is talking about the Samara housing, right? So we need the Samara housing. We need other prefab ideas. And one thing that, maybe we can finish the conversation today with is it's amazing that prefab has not been a bigger thing in single family residential architecture, because costs have gone up so much. Don't you think there'd be a place for prefab to come up with these efficiencies? But what we've learned from a lot of architects that have tried going down this path is it's still costly, but we are working with a lot of them to try and figure out if we can figure out some efficiencies for cost-effective projects that are really beautiful. So you need end users, you need developers, you need prefab, you need custom builds. We need everything in this area.
Yeah. Yeah. And with the sheer scale of everything that happened, I think that's right. Although, on a personal note, I hope we don't get overcome with Thomas James houses. I'm tired of seeing these things everywhere. They started, was it 15 years ago, and they just took over the West Side with these transitional things. So if I'm sort
it's
of
better than the stucco box.
To me, the key is variety.
Yeah.
Right. Where at least if you're going down, the different blocks in these neighborhoods, it doesn't feel like a truly pre-planned tract development.
Yeah.
Where there's 5 houses that were replicated one after the other after the other. Some of these larger companies that can come in and build hundreds of houses, they do have a number of different designs. And the reality is if you drove through these communities before, there were some beautiful houses and there were some houses that maybe, architecture buffs would not have been that excited about, but it was part of a fabric of a community that evolved over time and had a lot of different products that were out there. And so I think that's the key. Like Jason was saying, it's prefab, it's a large scale construction company. It's individual homeowners doing one-offs. It's, I mean, we can talk about the case study 2.0 houses that we're going to be working on as well as a potential part of the solution. It really is all of these things coming together to recreate a neighborhood with unique character overnight, which is not an easy thing to do.
Yeah.
And then what we also, before we get into case study, maybe we talk about, fire hardening and what we need to do there, for these different communities, plus the rebuild back efforts. The first and foremost thing that I've been shocked to learn how many of the fires were caused was through embers getting into vents.
Yep.
And that these mesh ember vent covers, which are like dollars at Home Depot, could have covered so many of these buildings and prevented these embers from getting inside, because when the fires are starting, a lot of times it's getting in through the inside and it's burning inside out. It's not from the heat and the fire kind of touching the roof or touching the side in many cases. It's from getting inside. And once it starts inside your walls, you're
done.
Pretty done.
You're done.
Right?
It's 90% of the fire spreads through embers. And people, we were talking about the other day, when people envision embers, they think of, the cute floating things with a bonfire, which is the case, but we had 100-mile-hour winds here. It's an ember storm. Those things that just shoved into the house.
Yeah.
And you have these old roofs, attic spaces that are vented. It just sucks those embers right in.
Yeah. And we really need an effort, and the city needs to step up.
Yeah.
And a lot of different cities that have hillside houses need to step up and say, everybody, and the insurance companies as well.
Yeah.
These insurance companies should be telling these
Actually,
people.
they should be the ones advocating
It's just
for
like
this.
You can't get your
size-
policy.
It's like a
until you
seismic retrofit,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Insurance companies require seismic retrofitting. It blows me away that insurance companies that have been, bailing on California didn't just require people to install ember covers, right? Or, in really sensitive areas, right up against the hillside, say, look, you need to put it on an exterior sprinkler system, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's going to cost you $20,000, $50,000, but maybe we'll give you a rebate because it makes our insurance. Like, there's things that the state could do, the insurance companies could do, that could have been foresight to prevent a lot of this, because you look at it and you think, man, so much of this could have been prevented. And you see certain houses that had fire hardened materials and had exterior sprinkler systems and had vent covers that are existing amongst chaos and destruction all around them.
Yeah.
And so, the new houses that are built, they need to, of course, have the fire resistant materials. Look, fires can still happen, but you need to make sure that the fire doesn't happen from the embers getting inside the house.
Yeah.
One, from the exterior, and two, we spend all this money on low impact development, LID, water retention systems. We spend a lot of money on many other things the city requires. It'd be nice to require these exterior sprinkler systems, whether it be water or it's a PHOS system where it's the red phosphate that you see dumped out of the helicopters and airplanes. My favorite example is Michael Kovac's house, which, did have fire hardened materials on the exterior, but he and his wife had a PHOS system that they installed 12 years ago. It was a barrel in their basement. You had to come in and stir it once a year, same material. When the fire happened, it sprayed this phosphate all over the property. Their grass is green and all their neighbors' houses are gone.
Yeah.
It really feels like these other communities need to get happening before next summer, right? We need to start implementing these.
It's almost
ideas.
that it needs to become like an actual requirement to obtain your building permit for people to like implement those things, or if there is some sort of incentive from one side or the other to kind of force people to get along with it.
And the sprinkler systems aren't the cheapest, but also was it Harry from Frontline was like, the sprinkler system's like the cost of a kitchen or even less, right?
Yeah, it's less.
So really, I'm like, it's the cost of a few appliances,
cheaper
depending on the
than
appliances
your
you're buying.
house.
So like, is it worth it?
Yeah, the cost benefit.
And if there's incentive systems set up by the state and the cities, these disasters cost billions and billions of dollars to taxpayers. Right?
Yeah.
And so if we just put money up front into prevention, you could
easier
save,
than
so it's much easier than trying to solve
Yeah.
building 10,000 properties back, which is what we're
Yeah,
dealing with
yeah.
here between the different fires in the LA region.
It's very concerning. We're all defeated by a lot of local politics and state politics these days, but here's a situation that is a completely bipartisan issue, right? Let's not have houses burn, right? And properties
Sure.
burn down.
Sure.
I think everybody can get on the same page with that.
Right.
I'm pretty sure, depending on who makes the request. But in today's meeting where we're making the request, we need to also, and we have, a policy person on our staff now that's working specifically on these fire rebuilds. And, we're talking about with the insurance companies and we need to get the state legislation to require in these high fire severity zones to incentivize people to fire harden existing houses.
That is the key.
Because new houses are already more fire resistant. But there's these houses that are just sitting there all over the place throughout our state that are just waiting for disaster.
Yeah.
So one of the tactics that we'd be remiss if we didn't mention on the roof is, having vents that are not, that are ember resistant and made of metal. That's like the cheapest thing to do. The next level up, which would still be very cost effective, is instead of having your attic space be vented, turn it into a closed roof. And actually now this is a brand new thing that we were talking to a building scientist on the show, whose dad is the one who pushed forward through this change in the code to allow this, is now you can do retrofit an old roof, make it unvented using typical insulation methods, and add a diffusion port at the ridge of the roof. So previously, if you want to retrofit an old attic space and make it an enclosed roof, it was very expensive because you had to use spray foam or some other kind of insulation, which is just people don't want to get into with. This method allows you to retrofit a roof, make it fully enclosed, so no vents at all, just a diffusion port at the top, which has like Tyvek or whatever it is. So you still have no entry points for embers. Your energy performance of the building goes up anyway because of this, and it's like way more cost effective than what you had to do before. And this is the brand new thing that I think just came through. I don't know what Christine said, but like super recently in terms of this being allowed in the code to do it this way instead of having going the previous route with spray foam and whatnot. But it's a fascinating. What they learned was that the way that moisture travels through an attic, it always gathered at the very peak and caused mold. So they thought, this guy, her dad, was like, well, what if we just do a diffusion port at the top to allow the attics to vent? Is that enough? And they found out through experimentation and grants it was enough. So they presented it to whatever body that makes decisions, and then they said, okay, let's put in the code. You can do this now instead of, doing everything else.
Well, we need a lot of brilliant minds to come up with solution ideas. And that's a great transition, honestly, into the Case Study 2.0 program. So Case Study program, this is an architectural podcast. The people listening are very familiar with the Case Study program of the 50s and 60s, where it was really about creating a new generation, a new type of living experience in the Southern California region that would spread throughout the world. And the objective was to do it at a cost-effective basis. That maybe didn't work out as well as we had hoped. But the case study program was incredibly successful in its impacts that it made to the field of architecture. And what we're solving for a very different problem here. We find it to be a very appropriate time to call out this as, for the namesake, which is so important, this Case Study 2.0, which everybody is so influenced by in the industry. And we've got a tremendous amount of the top architects and minds throughout the world. We have USC's School of Architecture, who was very involved in the original case study program and teaches a lot about it. Even though Steve and I are both Bruins, but we are dear, have become dear supporters of USC and the things that they do to really push forward our city. And it's a real collaborative effort. So we appreciate that from them and the excitement that they have about helping this case study program forward to solve for what is today's issue. Today's issue is solving for a design that can be beautiful to rebuild back these communities that have lost some great homes, and not just contemporary, but traditional as well, right? And in efficiencies, right? We've got this crisis on our hands of great architecture costing an exorbitant amount of money. And limiting great architecture to such an elite few is, to me, honestly, a big problem in a crisis that we're dealing with. And so we've really tasked these wonderful architects throughout country and world, and especially certain ones that are local, including Zyme architects who lost their personal house in the Palisades. You know, this is the best story, like to get a company like that involved in this case study program. It's so close to home for them. Literally, it is their home, right? And to create these prototype houses, each architecture firm is going to create a prototype house that has efficiencies and replication ability so that somebody can come in and rebuild that house on multiple lots to create scalability. The architects are working together to come up with ideas of things that can be utilized across all of the different projects and all the different design styles, because we don't want a homogeneous single design style. It's got to have personality and character and all of that. And we're hoping that we can present this to the community for it to, be widespreadly used. And the more people that get involved in terms of property owners, whether that be a developer or an end user, to implement these projects, the more scalability, the more cost effective we can be in solving for these things to get, cost efficiency, fire hardening, health and wellness is clearly a passion of ours and is something that, is this next generation. So how do you make a clean, healthy living house as well that we can implement for people across these regions?
And the ability to rebuild at scale. And going back to the original case study houses program, it was started in 1945 as a post-war effort at a time, for a different reason, a similar situation where they needed mass amounts of housing to be generated. And so they were trying to create these and investigate new ways of building contemporary architecture that could be done in a widespread and affordable way where these homes would be a template for future homes. As Jason mentioned, they built, iconic, legendary houses, but it never became widespread or affordable. And so we're trying to build upon that legacy by creating homes that can actually become widespread and affordable while maintaining aesthetic beauty. And one of the so we've set up this program that architects are going to be submitting designs to, and there are certain mandatory requirements for the submissions. There are fire hardening requirements, which are above and beyond the baseline code requirements. There is also a requirement that each plan that gets submitted is allowed to be utilized as a standard plan. So these are not one-off designs for individual homeowners. They are supposed to feel custom, bespoke, and designed by the great architectural minds of our day, so that these are homes that people are proud to build and live in and to have in their community, right? Rather than some of the more homogeneous, large-scale development homes that we maybe were talking about earlier. These are intended to look aesthetically elevated, refined, beautiful, but by making them standard plans where hopefully one design is built 10, 20, 30 times. And that may sound like a lot, but we're talking about thousands of houses that need to be built. I don't think you're really going to notice the replication in such a significant way throughout the neighborhoods. But by doing it a number of times over, and possibly by partnering an individual architect with an individual contractor to build that same house 10, 20, or 30 times, there's going to be an economy of scale and an increase in efficiency through the construction process that will drive down costs. Because you guys know, when you're doing a one-off bespoke house, every single detail is new, right? And so if you build a house and then built that same house the second time, I imagine you'd cut down your time of construction by, 20%. And you'd reduce your cost. You'd also reduce consultant cost, because once these details are designed the first time, the architect doesn't have to be quite as involved the second time around. And that's great. The architects have limited bandwidth to solve the problem that we're trying to solve for. So I think through replication, but also a focus on quality, we're hoping to provide a solution for members of the community that is elevated and also hopefully inspires people, and makes people excited about what's coming in these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Do you think those plans could even be like pre-approved by the city?
Yeah,
That's
so
the plan.
that's
Is
the
that
plan.
plan?
So basically, once we get a set of plans through the first time, right, which will take the full review process, that set of plans then will be fast tracked as a standardized plan that the city of LA has already stated that they would be accepting.
We met with the head of building and safety plan check on Friday to talk about the program. They're fully on board. They want to make it as efficient as possible. There are certain site-specific reviews that have to happen, but overall, the buildings themselves can be pre-approved. There's already pre-approved ADUs in the city of Los Angeles that are standard plans. So it'll be the same here.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So it's really exciting for us to, take this opportunity to try and get this out there. But now we have to really get the word out as well, because in order for this to be really effective, it has to be implemented at scale, right? And so we need homeowners to see this list and design styles of so many wonderful architects in so many different styles and get it out there and have them start looking through that menu to choose the project they want to do with a budget as well. That we are working on. So each architect is going to be teaming up with a contractor and creating budgets so that people really see the menu item with a price.
And there will be certain upgrade options available as well. So what we want is we want each architect to create a base model. And then let's just say, as an example, you use the Fleetwood 3 Series doors and windows in the base model. If somebody wanted to upgrade to the Fleetwood Edge, they could do that. That's going to be an add cost that they're going to have the option to do. We do want to make it limited, though, how many different things you can change, because obviously it gets in the way of the point if you can all of a sudden change every single detail of the house.
Well, I suppose if someone really wanted to go down that path, they could just call up the architect who did the plans and say, are you game to do further modifications?
True.
I would say that for any architects or homeowners considering that path, you have to be very clear on the scope of changes that are being discussed, because it's a slippery slope, as you guys know. I think that pairing with the contractor, or having at least contractors heavily involved, is essential, because to your point about construction costs, going up so much, it has placed a lot more additional pressure on projects where the clients don't have millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to spend. If we're not in that kind of stratospheric space, the rest of the projects, we have to be very careful. I mean, as architects, we have to be very careful with what we're doing and work more and more closely with the contractor we found, even for custom houses, through design, just to see where we're landing, because the prices are crazy. And I think to set up the machine that you're describing, that it would have to be a lot of conversations too, and maybe even the engineering too, to say, okay, what's the most efficient structural system that we can get in standard sizes for studs, put it up quickly, all the stuff that you guys, I'm sure you know, but it makes complete sense. I have to say that in the architecture community, rebooting or doing a case study 2.0 has been, a dream we're talked about for probably since the case study, since the 50s. But you're correct that now it's kind of would be the time. I mean, with unfortunately everything that happened, this would be the opportunity to do it properly and for real.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess if architects are interested in submitting to this case study program, where can they do that?
Yeah, they can reach out to us to discuss the program. And, it's there's a whole list of submission requirements, so they can reach out to us directly, find our information through our website. And
then potential homeowners who would be looking for these resources, we just keep looking at your website.
We're working on putting together a press release on this and getting the information out there as widespread as possible.
Okay.
So
stay tuned.
Right. We're early days right now. It is fully moving, and we have a lot of really exciting meetings coming up with various partners that are getting involved. But something that I also have been reminding people is we're only about 7 weeks out from the end of, when these fires stopped. Yeah. And so we're trying to move fast and well at the same time.
Yeah. I know we're coming up on the hour. Were there any closing remarks or words of wisdom or advice that you would give to folks who are about to embark on the rebuilding process?
The thing that I would mention is that we've been overwhelmed by the response of the community. People are not going about this alone.
Mm-hmm.
These areas that were impacted are areas that people loved to live in and are really excited to get back to. It's going to be a really difficult process. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And it's not always going to be clear at every step of the way. But based on the passion that we've seen from these individual homeowners and collectives of homeowners, I am extremely confident that the end result in these communities is going to be pretty spectacular. I don't know if that's going to be 3 years, 5 years, or 10 years from now, right? But when the Palisades, as an example, is back, I think it's going to be one of the most remarkable neighborhoods you could ever imagine living in.
Yeah. Love it. Jason, anything?
Boy, Stephen,
You gotta try to follow.
That's the beauty of having the two of us at the helm is one or the other, you're going to get the same thing. And we just really appreciate the opportunity. And, we've worked very hard throughout our careers, as everybody knows, and now to be able to utilize our skill sets in helping people in these really meaningful moments is gratifying for us to be someone that people can lean on. They've always leaned on us for a number of things, but now it's more critical than ever. And we are here, we are ready, and we're going to help build back better. And it's an exciting future ahead. And we're really motivated by the encouragement through this tragedy. And we appreciate you both for always being so encouraging of getting the word out around incredible information, putting architects on such a platform and pedestal, because, the architecture field should be celebrated. It's such brilliant minds that are problem solvers. They're artists, they're mathematicians. They are, such key innovators in our society. And you see it right now more than ever that when times are tough, the architect community comes together and they want to solve these problems. And we want to be right here to support all of you in making that happen. So thanks again.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. Again, if you want to reach out to us through our office, you can. The website is famearchitects.com. The podcast website is secondstudiopod.com, and you can find both of those on Instagram. The podcast is Second Studio Pod, and the office is fame_architects. We're happy to answer any questions you guys might have, and if we don't have the answers, then we'll certainly forward you to the right people. And if you want to support the show, then the best way to do that is to leave a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on Spotify and YouTube. And the show has a hotline, which is 213-222-6950. So you can call and leave a voicemail or text that message with questions or guest suggestions or topic suggestions. And we appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully everyone's doing well. Talk soon. Bye.